Hello, I'm Michael Shawn, and welcome to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Roger Dykes is a teacher and counselor with a master's degree in family counseling from Texas Tech University. He is the owner of UV Blake Records and has written a book titled Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World. And there's a few more things. Roger was born with cerebral palsy. Now a quadriplegic, he has been confined most of his life to a wheelchair. And for a while, even enjoying a career as a stand-up or sit-down comedian and after-dinner speaker. Disabled? Yes, but you forget about that pretty quickly because Roger thrives. So here is Roger Dykes. Roger Dykes, welcome to your podcast.
Thank you, Michael. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad you're here as well.
You know, Roger, I just have to point something out before we get started here, and that is, Roger, you can't help but ask the question, how many people with cerebral palsy who are confined to a wheelchair and literally without the use of their arms or legs, how many people like that have a podcast?
I would imagine very, very, very few, because there's another additional thing that you failed to mention in your description, and that is, unfortunately, many cerebral palsy people are not able to speak clearly enough to be understood in a podcast if they make one. That doesn't mean all cerebral palsy people are that way, but a goodly number are, and it's unfortunate because they're very smart people, but they're unable to speak clear enough, and people assume that they are not intelligent just because they do not speak well.
Roger, I wish that the people listening to this podcast who will eventually perhaps accomplish this after a few more of our podcasts with you here, but I wish that they knew you like I have known you over the years and become friends with you and learned a lot. For instance, the things that you talk about in your book that you have written, and we'll mention that several times. If people want to get that and read that, they can. But Roger, how in the world do you operate day to day and maintain a life that affects so many people, and yet you have this remarkable lifestyle that has its own challenges? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, a lot of it has changed dramatically in the last, say, 20 years or more because of technology. I had some effective work before that. I was on different councils and things like that, and got my educational degrees. But it has not been until the last several years that I've had access to the technology of computers, laptops, voice-activated software, all that sort of thing, that has made the job a lot easier for me to do, and I can be more productive.
To the listeners of this podcast, I'm going to point this out now. If you don't know Roger personally, you may not be aware of this, and it hasn't showed up yet. Roger Dykes has a remarkable sense of humor. And my understanding is that you were a sit-down comedian at one point. Tell us about that.
Well, and that was during the mid-'70s. I was billed as America's first sit-down comedian. I spoke throughout the Southwest here at different colleges, universities, lectures, that sort of thing, as well as some club work of that nature, and had a relatively successful run until I ended up buying a record store that kind of took me out of the entertainment business, or changed the direction of the entertainment business. But I did entertain throughout with a comedy routine that I did not have to worry about being stolen because only I would be able to tell the wheelchair jokes and get away with it.
That's something I'm certain will come up time and time again on the podcast because we have some really remarkable subjects that I know just because we have talked that you're going to cover on this podcast. But, I think it is just remarkable that you've continued to do what you do. For instance, let me give you for instance. Okay. Texas Tech University, a master's degree in family counseling.
Yes, sir.
Well, you don't normally think of someone confined to a wheelchair who is got, gee whiz, dozens of issues moving to and fro and getting back and forth to Texas Tech University or so on and so forth. You don't think about a person who deals with all the stuff that you deal with getting their master's degree.
Well, let me explain how that happened. I was hoping for an entertainment career, and just in case that didn't pan out, I wanted a backup idea. So I'd gotten a psychology, sociology degree in undergraduate. I was working on the entertainment career, decided I would go ahead and get my master's degree, and when they would ask me at Tech, one of the first things they do is they sit you in a circle and they ask you to describe yourself, what you plan to do, all those kind of things as a group therapy type situation. So when I would be asked what I was planning on doing, I would tell them that I planned on going to Las Vegas and entertaining. And of course, I was the only person in the room who had any aspiration for going to Las Vegas and entertaining because everybody else obviously planned on being a marriage counselor, otherwise they wouldn't be in this program. So then they would say, well, then what are you doing here? And I said, well, it's quite simple. I plan to go to Vegas. I plan to counsel by day and entertain by night. And it will work out well because when a lady comes in and says, I believe my husband is cheating on me with a brunette, I will explain to her, no, it's a redhead because I saw him in the club last night.
Roger, I remember when the whole idea for your podcast came up, I was privileged to be there, and I heard you say 3 times as you were dealing with some pretty remarkable issues and wanting some people at the state capitol to take a serious look at some things in your life that were in fact created by the way that your disability income and that sort of thing arrives at your place. And that's complicated, and we're going to go into that further down the line. But the point is that 3 different times I heard you say, my problem is, well, it's not that I can't express myself. It's not that I can't clearly explain what my situation is. The problem, you said, was that you don't have a platform. And people like you, severely disabled, people like you don't have a platform.
That is exactly right. We're limited because as a general rule, politicians and the movers and shakers of our society are busy moving and shaking for other people and not necessarily for the disabled. Because from a political standpoint, handicapped people do not vote as a block, so you can't go to a politician like the unions can, for example, and say, if you want the union vote, you need to listen to me. There's a wide variation of disability. We're not grouped together all in the same way, and we don't even necessarily have exactly the same needs from the private sector or from government, but we do have a general overall need, but we do not have the possibility of the political threat, so we don't have the platform. Now, also, as a general rule, there's exceptions to anything I say, but as a general rule, disabled people are not financially well off because they have not had the opportunity to make money and to earn money and to save money. As a result, when you're limited on both political power and money power, the high-ups in our society, the movers and shakers, if you will, doesn't have any interest in what we're talking about. So you have to come at it from a different vantage point to get their attention.
Roger, you had a pretty remarkable presence on another podcast, if I may. I would say that Free Range Texan podcast, and you did a remarkable interview there where you told a story about what happened to you, and you've had quite a few harrowing stories since then. But what happened to you one winter weekend when you were shut off from your caregivers and not able to make any other arrangements because of the way the state has you, for lack of a better term, hogtied, and that it was one thing that you wanted to bring up. There are several others, but that was one thing. And I remember you telling me at that time anyway, it wasn't even about trying to get more money. Trying to spend more taxpayers' dollars. It's just the way the whole thing was hooked up, and anybody with any sense that had time to look at it and took the time to seriously consider, like for instance your situation, can see that it's messed up. And yet it is very hard for you to get anything other than perhaps mid-level lip service. That lip service didn't ever go past that point to the real decision makers. And that's where you begin to get very frustrated that you did not have a platform because you have some very real issues.
That would be correct, I believe. And also, not only do I have issues, most people have issues with government, with the way things are done. But I hope to be able to share some solutions for the issues if I had the right people listening and would be willing to consider what I'm dealing with. Let me share this with you to tie this together. What you're talking about 4 years ago, there was a blizzard here. It came in on Sunday night, and I had a caregiver here with me until Monday morning. Caregiver needed to go home. The caregiver left. Well, my other caregivers began to call in saying they could not get out of their homes. I have about 4 on one given day. Each one of them called in, but realizing the reality that no one was going to be here for probably 24 hours.
Hey, Roger, can I interrupt you for just a moment? Hold your place right there because I want to turn it back to you. But I think it's important to mention right here that you are in a position you cannot get out of your wheelchair for any reason. You can't go to bed. If you're in bed, you can't get out of bed. You cannot go to the restroom. You cannot retrieve yourself anything to eat. And whatever water you may have just in a little flask with a straw is all the water that you have. And you are perfectly alone when you are in that situation. So there is, for several reasons on several different levels, a very real danger at that point when that occurs.
Also, if there's any kind of power failure or anything like that, I'm not able to go get a blanket or a quilt or whatever. And were I to get one, I couldn't put it around me anyway. So there is a danger, but when I realized the reality of my situation, I began to plan things. Immediately, I changed my whole routine around to accommodate this new adventure in my life because I stopped drinking water. I stopped eating food because those are bathroom issues or result in bathroom issues that I cannot deal with without help. And knowing I'm going to be up all night because I cannot get into the bed by myself, nor can I get out of it, I began playing projects here in my office that I could work on throughout the night till someone came, and I was simply hoping that someone would be here the next morning, which, by the way, they were, so that was all fine. Now, before we make the state sound like they have no heart at all, the listeners need to understand that the state has it set, this program that I'm on is set up with state money, but it's set up with the idea that you have family or close relatives within the general area that when the weather forecast says there is a snowstorm coming, you immediately call the relatives and have some of them come over. They've already signed papers to agree to come and things like that. And so you're taken care of. And so the state has a solution. But in my particular case, and in the case of others, I'm sure like me who are on this program, I have no family here in the area. So I don't have anyone to call. Now, I have friends, and I have very good friends. But most of my good friends are not in a position where they can close up their world and move over here because they have issues of their own to deal with. So this is the, if you will, this is the gap that the state has allowed to be here that has not been addressed regarding illness, regarding flu, regarding bad cold. What the state will have you do, or their recommendation, is if you get sick because you don't have anybody around, you call the EMS and the ambulance comes and picks you up. Well, that is a solution. But the problem with that solution is that it is overkill and not a productive solution because you really don't want me taking up a bed in the hospital for a bad cold or something very minor.
The thing that I know that our listeners may not be aware of is that I have visited with you and listened to you long enough to know that you have some really intelligent solutions that people all over the state of Texas, if not all over the United States, could really benefit from, yet you haven't been able to get anyone to listen to you. That being said, we just frankly don't have the time on this episode to begin to address all of those issues. I think our listeners so far can see things that could be done to really improve the lives of some disabled people, particularly around the state of Texas. Roger, you have this remarkable story, and we have just scratched the surface. That's why you have a podcast now.
Yes, sir. And what I would like as time goes on, we have on my Facebook page, we have put my email address. And I would be happy to entertain questions and concerns of people over the state of Texas, around the world, where the podcast goes, to look at their issues, because I can look at someone else's situation and put it together with mine and figure out maybe workable solution that they may not have thought of. But the fact is that everybody that lives probably knows someone who is disabled. And let me assure you that if you don't know someone who's disabled and you live long enough, you yourself will probably run into some level of disability yourself. If you break your leg skiing, you come home, and they put you in a wheelchair to begin with, one of the first things you're going to realize, your bathroom door is not wide enough to get a wheelchair through.
All right, Roger, we want folks to know that your Facebook presence is, of course, listed under Roger Dykes. That's ROGER-DYKES. And Roger, we are about out of time, but I am really looking forward to be able to walk through this journey with you, and I am so glad. Our podcast is due to be repeating about every 3 weeks on Roger Dykes Just Sayin. However, the first 2 or 3 of our podcasts should come up much sooner than that. So that's our production schedule for the next few days. And Roger, Bless you, brother. I'll see you next time.
All right, thanks, and I'll look forward to having you come back.
You've been listening to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. If you'd like to get a message to Roger, his Facebook account is listed as Roger Dykes. Become a friend, or you can send your questions and comments to rogerdykes51@gmail.com. That's ROGERDYKES51@gmail.com. Our podcast reveals a new episode every 3 weeks. Rollout is on Wednesday evening, shortly after dark, Texas time. Join us next time for our next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin. I'm Michael Shawn. On behalf of Roger Dykes, thanks for listening.